Welcome to the Top 20 Lair. I'm Arden Fair, the autistic baby Einstein fan 2003. And today, we are going to be counting our 20 picks for the deadliest serial killers in the world. We are going to take a look at the horrible things they've done. Let's begin, shall we, folks?
Number 20, H. Holmes. H. Holmes was an American con artist and serial killer active between 1891 and 1894. By the time of his execution in 1896, he had engaged in a lengthy criminal career that included insurance fraud, forgery, swindling, 3 or 4 bigamous marriages, horse theft, and murder. He was known as the Beast of Chicago, the Devil in the White City, or the Torture Doctor. His most notorious crimes took place in Chicago around the time of the World's Columbian Exposition in 1893. He was convicted and sentenced to death for the murder of Benjamin Pittisel, his accomplice in several of his cons. However, he confessed to 27 murders, including those of some people who were verifiably still alive. It is believed that he also killed 3 of Pittisel's children, as well as 3 mistresses, the child of one mistress and the sister of another. Holmes was hanged on May 7, 1896.
Number 19. Israel Keyes. Israel Keyes was an American serial killer, bank robber, burglar, arsonist, kidnapper, and sex offender. He murdered at least 3 people, and law enforcement investigators believe he committed at least 20 other crimes across the United States from the late 1990s to February 2012, including arsons, burglaries and bank robberies. He was arrested in March 2012 and killed himself while awaiting trial. The evidence in his jail cell led the Federal Bureau of Investigation to suspect that he murdered 11 people. In the summer of 1997 or 1998, he sexually assaulted a teenage girl, estimated age 14 to 18, who had been tubing with her friends down the Deschutes River in Walpen, Oregon. He admitted that he stalked her from a tree line before threatening the girl with a knife and very violently sexually assaulting her. Originally planning to murder her as part of a satanic ritual, Keyes let her go in the river tube he had abducted her. He told the investigators, "I was too timid. I wasn't violent enough. I made up my mind I was never going to let that happen again."
Number 18, John Wayne Gacy. John Wayne Gacy was an American serial killer and sex offender who raped, tortured, and murdered at least 33 young men and boys between 1972 and 1978 in Norwood Park Township, Illinois, a suburb of Chicago. He became known as the Killer Clown due to his public performances as a clown prior to the discovery of his crimes. He had previously been convicted in 1968 of the sodomy of a teenage boy in Waterloo, Iowa, and was sentenced to 10 years imprisonment, but served 18 months. He murdered his first victim in 1972, had murdered twice more by the end of 1975, and murdered at least 30 victims after his divorce from his second wife in 1976. The investigation into the disappearance of Des Plaines teenager Robert Deadliest has led to his arrest on December 21, 1978. He was sentenced to death on March 13, 1980. He was executed by lethal injection at Statesville Correctional Center on May 10, 1994.
Number 17, Randall Woodfield. Randall Woodfield is an American serial killer, serial rapist, kidnapper, robber, burglar, and former football player who was dubbed the I-5 Killer or the I-5 Bandit by the media due to the crimes he committed along the Interstate 5 corridor running through Washington, Oregon, and California. He played for the Green Bay Packers. Before his capture, he was suspected of multiple sexual assaults and murders. Though convicted of only 1 murder, he has been linked to a total of 18 murders and is suspected of having killed up to 44 people. In 1975, he began a string of robberies and sexual assaults on women in Portland, which he committed at knife point. Between 1980 and 1981, he committed multiple murders in cities along the I-5 corridor. His earliest documented murder was that of Cherie Ayers, a former classmate whom he had known since his childhood. In October 1980, after committing numerous violent crimes, he was arrested in March 1981 and convicted in June of the murder of Cherie Hull and attempted murder of her co-worker, Beth Wilmot. He was sentenced to life imprisonment plus 90 years. In a subsequent trial, He was convicted of sodomy and improper use of a weapon in a sexual assault case, receiving 35 additional years to his sentence.
Number 16, Dennis Rader. Dennis Rader, also known as the BTK Killer, the BTK Strangler, or simply BTK, is an American serial killer who murdered at least 10 people in Wichita and Park City, Kansas, between 1974 and 1991. Although he occasionally killed or attempted to kill men and children, Rader typically targeted women. His victims were often attacked in their homes, then bound, sometimes with objects from their homes, and either suffocated with a plastic bag or manually strangled with a ligature. In a series of crimes that terrorized Wichita in the mid to late 1970s, he also initiated a series of taunting letters he sent to police and media outlets, describing his crimes in detail and referring to himself as BTK, for bind, torture, kill. In addition, he stole keepsakes from his female victims, including underwear, driver's licenses, and personal items. In 1979, BTK suddenly went quiet, and despite an exhaustive investigation, the case grew into one of the most infamous cold cases in American history. Rader would later confess to killing 3 further victims between 1985 and 1991 that were not initially linked to BTK, but were confirmed to be his doing through DNA and items found in his possession. In 2004, after a 13-year hiatus, he resumed sending letters, where he hinted at committing further crimes. Based on items he turned over to law enforcement, he was identified and arrested in February 2005, pleading guilty to his crimes months later, and was given 10 consecutive life sentences. He is currently incarcerated at the El Dorado Correctional Facility.
Number 15, Frank Davis. Frank Davis was an American serial killer who raped and murdered 3 teenage boys in Indiana between 1971 and 1983. While at a juvenile detention center, he was sexually abused by one of the attendants and at least one other inmate. The courts later said the attack that he suffered from the fellow inmate was similar to how he assaulted one of his victims. He was charged with 2 counts of murder for killing Reed and Lopez and 2 counts of attempted murder for the assaults on the surviving victims. He was convicted of all of the charges and sentenced to death for the 2 murders. He was also given 2 consecutive 50-year sentences for the 2 attempted murders. On December 8, 1993, his sentences for the murder convictions were reduced to 60 years each. All of the sentences ran consecutively, leaving him with 220 years to serve in prison. He died in prison on January 22, 2008.
Number 14, Teresa Lewis. Teresa Lewis was an American murderer who was the only woman on death row in Virginia before her execution. She was sentenced to death by lethal injection for the murders of her husband and stepson in October 2002. She sought to profit from a $250,000 life insurance policy her stepson had taken out as a U.S. Army reservist in anticipation of his deployment to Iraq. In September 2010, she became the first female inmate to die by lethal injection in the state of Virginia. The state had last executed a female, 17-year-old Virginia Christian, in 1912. The case led to debate over capital punishment owing to her sex, as well as to questions regarding her mental capacity. Capital punishment was abolished in Virginia on March 24, 2021, officially making her the last woman to be executed in Virginia.
Number 13, Cynthia Kaufman. Cynthia Kaufman is an American serial killer who was convicted in the 1986 deaths of 2 women in California. She was convicted along with her boyfriend, James Gregory Marlowe. She admits to being present at the murders but insists she suffered from battered woman syndrome. She was sentenced to death and is sitting on death row in Central California Women's Facility. She and Marlowe were accused of kidnapping and killing 4 women in October and November 1986. They were arrested on November 14, 1986, following which she confessed to the murders. Her attorneys say that she loved Marlowe but that he battered, brainwashed, and starved her, so she did not run from Marlowe when the crime spree began. In addition to the California murders, she and Marlowe are also believed to have carried out the July 7, 1986, slaying of 28-year-old Gregory Hill in Whitley City, Kentucky. They were put on trial in July 1989 and in 1990 sentenced to death. She was the first woman to receive a death sentence in California since the reinstatement of the death penalty in that state in 1977. A trial in 1992 convicted her of another murder, for which she received a sentence of life imprisonment.
Number 12, Ricky Ray Rector. Ricky Ray Rector was an American convicted murderer who was executed for the 1981 murder of police officer Bob Martin in Conway, Arkansas. After killing a man in a restaurant and fleeing, he spent 3 days on the run before he agreed to turn himself in. However, instead of giving himself up, he shot and killed the police officer to whom he had agreed to turn himself in. He then shot himself in the head in a suicide attempt. The attempt effectively resulted in a lobotomy. A 1991 request for writ of certiorari to the Supreme Court was denied, with Justice Thurgood Marshall dissenting. Despite his mental state, then Arkansas Governor Bill Clinton made a point of returning to Arkansas to personally handle his case during the 1992 U.S. presidential election campaign. He was subject to a unique overlap of controversies in 1992, during his execution in Arkansas. An off-cited example of his mental insufficiency is his decision to save the dessert from his last meal for later, which would have been after his execution. In 2002, the U.S. Supreme Court banned the execution of people with intellectual disabilities in Atkins v. Virginia, ruling that the practice constitutes cruel and unusual punishment. He was put to death by lethal injection. It took medical staff more than 50 minutes to find a suitable vein.
Number 11. Keith Daniel Williams. Keith Daniel Williams was an American triple murderer who was executed by the state of California for the October 1978 murders of 3 people in Merced, California. He was convicted and sentenced to death in 1979 and was subsequently executed in 1996 at San Quentin State Prison by lethal injection. In 1976, he stabbed his best friend and attempted suicide. According to doctors and defense lawyers, he suffered from bipolar disorder, which came on during his 20s. After he tried to commit suicide, he checked into the Claremont Community Hospital in San Diego, but his reckless behavior continued. By 1977, he had been arrested 11 times and had spent nearly a third of his life in prison for various offenses. He was a father who had been married twice, however, both marriages ended in divorce. He resided in Corning near his family. On May 3, 1996, in the execution chamber at San Quentin State Prison, at 12:03 a.m., the prison warden gave the order to begin the execution. He was executed via lethal injection and was pronounced dead at 12:08 a.m. He spent his final day with his attorneys and a spiritual advisor. Some of the family members of the victims supported the execution, while others opposed it. Macias's daughter opposed the execution. Vargas's son, however, described him as a cold, brutal murderer who deserved his punishment. He was quoted as saying, "He should have been dead a long time ago."
Number 10, Patrick Baxter. Patrick Baxter is an American serial killer who raped and killed 2 women and a teenage girl in Westchester County, New York, between 1987 and 1990. Due to DNA profiling, he was arrested for the murders in 2000 while serving a sentence for car theft and was convicted and sentenced to 25 years to life imprisonment. Since 1990, he has been jailed and released from prison on several occasions for different crimes. In the mid-1990s, he was convicted of auto theft in the Bronx and sentenced to 3 to 7 years imprisonment at the Downstate Correctional Facility in Fishkill, with eligibility for parole in 2001. In early 2000, investigators examining cold cases noticed that his name kept popping up in relation to these cases, and they ordered that he give a blood sample for testing. After a legal battle, a sample was provided, which matched the killer's DNA in all 3 cases. Charges were soon filed, and he was brought to trial in 2002. He was convicted of all 3 murders and sentenced to 25 years to life imprisonment for each murder, to be served consecutively. During his sentencing, he expressed his condolences to the victims' families, but calmly denied committing the murders.
Number 9, Gordon Northcott. Gordon Northcott was a Canadian serial killer, child rapist, and child abductor who was convicted of the murders of 3 young boys in California, U.S., and confessed to the murders of 9 in total. He was executed on October 2, 1930. While residing at his chicken ranch, he abducted an undetermined number of boys and sexually abused them. Typically, after abusing a victim, he would drive the boy home and let him go. However, he murdered some of them at the ranch. The police in Canada arrested him and his mother on September 19, 1928. Due to errors in the extradition paperwork, they were not returned to Los Angeles until November 30. He was implicated in the murder of Walter Collins, but because his mother had confessed to murdering Collins and had been sentenced for it, the state chose not to prosecute Northcott in that murder. In early 1929, his trial was held before Judge George R. Freeman in Riverside County, California. The jury heard that he kidnapped, molested, tortured, and murdered the Winslow brothers and the headless Mexican in 1928. On February 8, he was convicted of those murders. On February 13, Freeman sentenced him to death. He was hanged on October 2, 1930, at San Quentin State Prison. The rope failed to break Northcott's neck, resulting in it taking 13 minutes for him to die from strangulation.
Number 8, Kevin Taylor. Kevin Taylor is an American serial killer who strangled 4 prostitutes to death following sexual encounters in Chicago, Illinois, between June and August 2001. After a would-be 5th victim survived and identified him, he was arrested and sentenced to multiple life terms in 2006. In early August, police in Chicago's North Side issued an alert to local street women, warning them about the recent murders. By this time, they were investigating the deaths of up to 18 women involved with prostitution dating back to the 1990s. When the police examined the body of Blunt, they discovered a time card underneath her, which contained his name. Subsequently, police arrested him at his job on August 21. By this time, the 4 murders were suspected to be linked, and police sought to question the only surviving victim of the killer, who was Robinson. In a police lineup, Robinson identified him as the man who attacked her. Other evidence, including a fingerprint matching his fingerprint that was found on the trash can Hulk was found in, led prosecutors to file 3 additional murder charges. The charges laid against him surprised just about everyone who knew him. Larry Jones, a friend of his girlfriend, told the Chicago Tribune that he just didn't do all the things they say he did. "I went to church today to pray for him. I hope he gets through this right." After some time, however, he confessed to the police that he was responsible for all 5 crimes because he became enraged at the women during sex. With the help of local authorities, he led them to the murder scenes and reenacted the methods he used to kill his victims.
Number 7, Jeffrey Dahmer. Jeffrey Dahmer, also known as the Milwaukee Cannibal or the Milwaukee Monster, was an American serial killer and sex offender who killed and dismembered 17 men and boys between 1978 and 1991. Many of his later murders involved necrophilia, cannibalism, and the permanent preservation of body parts, typically all or part of the skeleton. Although he was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, schizotypal personality disorder, and a psychotic disorder, he was found to be legally sane at his trial. He was convicted of 15 of the 16 homicides he had committed in Wisconsin and was sentenced to 15 terms of life imprisonment on February 17, 1992. He was later sentenced to a 16th term of life imprisonment for an additional homicide committed in Ohio in 1978. On November 28, 1994, he was beaten to death by Christopher Scarver, a fellow inmate at the Columbia Correctional Institution in Portage, Wisconsin.
Number 6, Dana Sue Gray. Dana Sue Gray is an American serial killer who murdered 3 elderly women in 1994. She was caught after a 4th intended victim survived and identified her. Gray claims to have committed the murders to support her spending habits. She is serving a sentence of life, without the possibility of parole, in the California Women's Prison in Chowchilla. Many of the residents of Canyon Lake were terrified. Some moved in with loved ones until the murders were solved. A group of elderly widows began sleeping in big groups at designated houses. They believed there was safety in numbers. A few residents theorized the murders were committed by a cult that engaged in ritual sacrifice. Detectives initially had problems finding suspects early on. At one point, it was so hard to find a lead that the supervisor in charge recommended using a psychic. Before she became the lead suspect, detectives had a few other suspects.
Number 5, William Bonin. William Bonin, also known as the Freeway Killer and the Freeway Strangler, was an American serial killer and sex offender who raped, tortured, and murdered numerous young men and boys between May 1979 and June 1980 in Southern California. He was convicted of 14 murders, but he confessed to 21 and is suspected of even more. His first known murder victim was killed in May 1979. He generally operated by luring his victims into his van under the pretense of having consensual sex. He became known as the Freeway Killer because most of his victims' bodies were discovered beside freeways. On many occasions, he was helped by one of his 4 known accomplices. One of them, Vernon Butts, was listed in court as an accomplice for 12 murders. He died via suicide before his trial in 1982. Described by the prosecutor at his first trial as the most arch-evil person who ever existed, he spent 14 years on death row before his execution by lethal injection at San Quentin State Prison in 1996. He was the first prisoner in California to die by this method.
Number 4, Robert Alton Harris. Robert Alton Harris was an American car thief, burglar, kidnapper, and serial killer executed at San Quentin State Prison in 1992 for the 1978 murders of 2 teenage boys in San Diego. His execution was the first in the state of California since 1967. He was born in Fort Bragg, North Carolina, and was abused as a child. He had run-ins with police as early as age 10, and was first placed into juvenile detention at age 13 for stealing a car. His mother abandoned him at age 14, and he was soon placed into juvenile detention after stealing another car. Following his release, he found work, married, and had a son. In 1975, he was imprisoned for manslaughter and paroled in January 1978. On July 5, 1978, he and his younger brother commandeered a car occupied by 2 16-year-old boys, John Mieski and Michael Baker, ordered them to drive to a remote area, then killed them. The brothers then used the car as their getaway car when they robbed a bank in San Diego. He was arrested less than an hour after the robbery and charged with murder, auto theft, kidnapping, burglary, and bank robbery. One of the arresting officers, Steve Baker, was the father of one of the murdered boys, but did not realize the victim was his son until later. He was convicted and sentenced to death on March 6, 1979. After a series of appeals and stays of execution, he was executed in San Quentin's gas chamber on April 21, 1992.
Number 3, Leroy Snyder. Leroy Snyder was an American serial killer who murdered 6 women and 1 man in Camden, New Jersey, over a period of 8 months in 1969. He was a habitual offender who was on parole at the time of the murders. After his arrest, he pleaded guilty to each crime to avoid a potential death sentence and was given 6 life sentences. In December 1949, at age 18, he attempted to strangle a local woman using a clothesline. Arrested not long after, he was jailed only briefly before being released and returning to Camden. There, he was apprehended by authorities after making vulgar threats of rape to 2 young women. He was jailed again for 4 years before being released in June 1955. He was once again arrested in July 1955 for robbing and assaulting a cab driver in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, for which he was given a 5-year sentence. Another arrest came in 1959 for armed robbery, for which he was sentenced to 10 years imprisonment. He was incarcerated at New Jersey State Prison until being paroled in December 1968. Under New Jersey law, he couldn't be sentenced to death after a confession, so on July 17, 1970, he was sentenced to 3 terms of life imprisonment. He was required to serve at least 43.5 years of his sentence before being considered for parole, which would have been in 2014 at 84 years of age. On October 1, 2001, he had served 31 years of his initial sentence, and he died at New Jersey State Prison at age 70.
Number 2, Ted Bundy. Ted Bundy was an American serial killer who kidnapped, raped and murdered dozens of young women and girls between 1974 and 1978. His modus operandi typically consisted of convincing his target that he needed assistance or duping them into believing he was an authority figure. He would then lure his victim to his vehicle, at which point he would bludgeon them unconscious, then restrain them with handcuffs before driving them to a remote location to be sexually assaulted and killed. He killed his first known victim in February 1974 in Washington, and his later crimes stretched to Oregon, Colorado, Utah, and Idaho. He frequently revisited the bodies of his victims, grooming and performing sex acts on the corpses until decomposition and destruction by wild animals made further interactions impossible. Along with the murders, he was also a prolific burglar, and on a few occasions, he broke into homes at night and bludgeoned, maimed, strangled, and sexually assaulted his victims in their sleep. In 1975, he was arrested and jailed in Utah for aggravated kidnapping and attempted criminal assault. He then became a suspect in a progressively longer list of unsolved homicides in several states. Facing murder charges in Colorado, Bundy engineered 2 dramatic escapes and committed further assaults in Florida, including 3 murders, before being recaptured in 1978. For the Florida homicides, he received 3 death sentences in 2 trials and was executed in the electric chair at Florida State Prison on January 24, 1989.
And finally, number 1, Albert Fish. Albert Fish was an American serial killer, rapist, child molester, and cannibal who committed at least 3 child murders between July 1924 and June 1928. He was also known as the Gray Man, the Werewolf of Wisteria, the Brooklyn Vampire, the Moon Maniac, and the Boogeyman. He was a suspect in at least 10 murders during his lifetime, although he only confessed to 3 murders that police were able to trace to a known homicide. He also confessed to stabbing at least 2 other people. He once boasted that he had children in every state, and at one time stated his number of victims was about 100. However, it is not known whether he was referring to rapes or cannibalization, nor is it known if the statement was truthful. He was apprehended on December 13, 1934, and put on trial for the kidnapping and murder of Grace Budd. He was convicted and executed by the electric chair on January 16, 1936, at the age of 65.
And that's the end of the top 20 deadliest serial killers in the world. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for more upcoming content. This is Arden Fair, the Autistic Baby Einstein Fan 2003, signing off. Goodbye.